Alright, so you've gotten the 163 subscribers Q&A. Now it's time for the 163 subscribers Q without A, where instead of questions coming inbound to me, I'm throwing questions outbound regarding various things I have wondered about. I answered 16 questions last time, and here are 16 questions I'm posing. These questions range from well-specified to rather nebulous. You could provide your thoughts, observations, conjectures, or maybe even answers regarding them. 1. If a creature with human-level intelligence was a sea or flying creature instead of a land creature, would it have been generally better at three-dimensional geometry? Okay, so here's the basis for asking this question. Most humans seem to find three-dimensional geometry surprisingly difficult, and by that I mean that intuition is often quite off on it, in such a way that it seems most people find working through three-dimensional geometry harder than working through two-dimensional geometry by an amount more than expected from just adding a dimension. Now, here's the thing about humans. We are land creatures, which means that our world is actually mostly two-dimensional, as in most of what we do is going north-south or east-west. The amount by which we, up-down is insignificant compared to the amount we move about on the surface of the Earth. We mostly do things on one ground. In fact, for most of our history, we barely ever used the z-axis, and it's only become more of a thing in recent centuries, when we started building things upwards. So if there was a swimming or flying creature with human-level intelligence, a being that lives a life more in true 3D, if you will, would such a creature be much better at three-dimensional geometry? In fact, if we managed to establish communication with, say, dolphins, would we find out they're better at three-dimensional geometry than us? 2. How would one define a convex hole on a spherical surface? For those who don't know what a convex hole is, a convex hole of a set is the smallest area that contains all of the set while still being convex. So for instance, if you had a set of points on a plane, if you imagine a nail at each point and then you got a rubber band that you stretched along the outermost nails so that all the nails were within the rubber band, the shape that rubber band takes when it snaps into place would be the convex hole. This is well definable on the plane, and it feels like this concept should be able to be extrapolated onto a spherical surface. But it turns out the definition only maps over easily when all the points are within the same hemisphere. Like, imagine the 6-point set on the Earth with 1 point at the North Pole, 1 point at the South Pole, and 4 points equally spaced along the equator. What's the convex hole of that? Maybe it's completely fruitless to try to extend the definition of a convex hole to a set not contained within any one hemisphere, but it feels like we should be able to have some extension that captures the spirit of the convex hole. Incidentally, what got me to eventually ask this question was at some point finding that I could do something interesting by finding the convex hole of each country, and then realizing there is a handful of countries for which one can't simply find a convex hole. Yet another travesty of worldwide imperialism. 3. Why is the overpass of Bayview Avenue over I-580 in Richmond, California so high? No, seriously, take a glance at the Street View link in the description. Specifically, this overpass is a lot higher than most overpasses over a highway are built. You look at the previous and next overpasses along I-580, and neither of them are nearly this high. Both ChatGPT and Perplexity say that this overpass is this high because it also needs to go over the railroad to the east, but the next overpass south also goes over the same railroad, so I don't believe this reason. 4. In Yahtzee, it's been computed that with perfect skill and average luck, the expected score is 255. It's also fairly easy to figure out that with the best luck and the best skill, you would score 1,575, and with the worst luck and the worst skill, you would score 5. But what would you score if you had the best luck and the worst skill, and if you had the worst luck and the best skill? I think this question is further complicated by the fact that I believe, as presented here, it might still not be well defined. For instance, in the worst luck best skill scenario, is the player aware that a streak of optimally bad luck is coming? Because the best decisions to make for a player could depend on having this foreknowledge. Perhaps both of these are potentially interesting questions. The concept of best luck worst skill scores and worst luck best skill scores are also potentially quite interesting to ask for other games, with both luck and skill components. 5. Why are so many high points close to, but not on a border? Okay, so rivers and mountain ridges are usually agreed to be the best natural boundaries on which to draw borders, right? Since mountain ridge traces should trace the highest points along a mountain range, you should expect high points of countries and their subdivisions to usually be on a border when they're drawn with this in mind. Yet in our world, there's a large number of high points that are not on a border, but rather just a little bit off a border. In fact, if you were looking at a world map that highlighted them, you might actually conclude they're on the border, but later see a zoomed-in map where you realize, finally, that it's actually slightly off. A great example is Aconcagua, which is the highest point in both the Americas and the Southern Hemisphere. For such a prominent mountain, you'd imagine it lies on the border between Argentina and Chile, a border that generally follows the highest peaks of the Andes, and yet Aconcagua is entirely within Argentina, despite being less than 15 kilometers from Chile. Mount Logan, Canada's highest point, is another situation, just 30 kilometers from the border with Alaska, but not on the border, though in this case, at least the border is not that drawn along natural boundaries. There's quite a few straight lines in play in this case. Tabana Tlaniana, Lesotho's highest point, is a particularly amazing case, being less than 5 kilometers from the border without being on the border. What during border decision making along these mountain ridge borders causes so many just off the border high points? 6. Suppose you made a graph in which you gave each animal a node, and then you drew a directed edge from node A to node B if there exists some natural human language in which the word for the animal of node A is semantically contained in the word for the animal of node B. For instance, we draw directed edges from cat to owl and from eagle to owl because in Mandarin, the word for owl literally means cat-headed eagle. And we draw a directed edge from human to orangutan because in Malay, where the word comes from, the word means forest person. Once we've drawn directed edges in for all natural human languages, what does this graph look like? Does it have cycles? What are its sources and sinks? 7. What is the smallest n such that in chess, if the 50-move rule was replaced with the n-move rule, this rule would not ever matter for a perfect skill chess player? We know that 50 is too small for n because there exist drawn positions where a player can force a win if not for the 50-move rule. In fact, there exist such positions with only 5 pieces on the board, a king and 2 knights versus a king and pawn, where the game is drawn in optimal play specifically because of the existence of the 50-move rule. But without it, the side with a king and 2 knights can force a win. 8. What is the optimally difficult mine density on a large Minesweeper board? More formally, what is the limit as n goes to infinity of the optimally difficult mine density on an n by n Minesweeper board? Okay, so when you have a Minesweeper board with very few mines, it's really easy. Then, when you increase the number of mines on the same size of board, it gets harder and harder. Eventually, it reaches a point when it's insanely difficult, and you're just starved for information. But eventually, it starts getting a bit easier again. Because at high enough mine densities, basically every click is a guess anyway, and as you increase the number of mines, the number of non-mine squares you need to guess decreases. Like, 30 by 30 with 896 mines is basically 30 by 30 with 895 mines with one fewer, very low likelihood of survival guess. There is a challenge here in posing this question in that it's actually quite tricky to define optimally difficult, but here's a not exactly rigorous empirical definition. It is optimally difficult when the perfect skill Minesweeper player has the highest expected number of restarts necessary to win a game. 9. Why do irregular moons line up with the planet's plane of rotation substantially less frequently than uniform chance? Okay, so the gas giants of our solar system have regular moons and irregular moons. Regular moons tend to be moons that formed along with the planet from outer dust and are nearly all spherical and are pretty much all the larger moons. Due to their formation, basically all of them orbit at or near the plane of the planet's rotation. Irregular moons tend to be captured asteroids, are generally much smaller and nearly all jagged in shape, and because of this, can orbit the planet at many different angles. Except, the distribution of the angles of irregular moons is very different from a uniform distribution. If irregular moons are captured asteroids, you'd expect that at least once in a while one would get captured in such a way it just happens to fall into an orbit very near the plane of the planet's rotation. And yet, Of the over 300 irregular moons known, there is a total of 1 moon orbiting prograde at within 10 degrees of the plane of rotation of the planet, and there's a good number of moons orbiting retrograde within 10 degrees of the plane of rotation, but they are all moons of Saturn. So Jupiter and Uranus have not a single irregular moon known to orbit within 10 degrees of the plane of rotation. Neptune has 1 moon within 10 degrees, and Saturn has a lot of them all retrograde. Why? 10. Suppose you had 2 large tanks of water, and you had a cube-shaped bucket with an open top, and you were transferring the water from one tank to the other using just the bucket. What percentage full should you fill the bucket on your trips from one tank to the other to finish the transfer in the minimal amount of time while spilling no water? Clearly, barely filling the bucket is suboptimal because you'll have to take that many more trips, and clearly filling the bucket too full will make you have to move too slowly to prevent the water from spilling. Where's the optimum? How does this vary with the various variables that could be involved? The length of the bucket, the size of the tanks, the distance between the tanks, the length and height of your steps, the acceleration due to gravity of the planet? 11. Why does Staples sell Tide Pods? No, really, who goes to Staples to buy Tide Pods? Like, there's this interesting thing where many types of stores sell something that is very tangential to what the store is about. And if it's something like Tic Tacs, well, at least it's something someone might buy as an impulse purchase when they went to a store intending to buy something more core to the store's business. Like, they see it and go, I just feel like having a pack of Tic Tacs. But who impulse buys Tide Pods? I really want to know who goes to Staples to buy Tide Pods such that Staples bothers to carry them. 12. Is there an upper bound to the ratio of consecutive integers Euler Totient functions when the lower integer is odd? More specifically, what is the supremum of phi of quantity 2n plus 2 over phi of quantity 2n plus 1, where n is a positive integer and phi is the Euler Totient function? Alright, now for an explanation of all the math terms in that for the non-mathy section of my audience. If you're in the mathy section of my audience, or I guess if you're in the non-mathy section of my audience and just want to skip to the next question anyway, my videos come with chapters, so you can skip to question 13. A supremum is a more expanded idea upon the idea of a maximum. A supremum is the smallest number for which no numbers in a set are larger than it. If you have a finite set of numbers like 4, 12, 13, 44, its supremum is just the maximum, in this case 44. But you could have an infinite set of numbers like 0, 1/2, 3/4, 7/8, 15, 16th, etc., where this set has no maximum, but it has a supremum, which is 1. The Euler Totient function, usually denoted phi, of a positive integer, is the number of positive integers less than an integer that are relatively prime with it, that is, their greatest common divisor is 1. So the Euler Totient function of 10, for example, is 4, because the positive integers less than 10, which have a greatest common divisor of 1 with 10, are 1, 3, 7, and 9, and that's 4 numbers. The z plus here means positive integers, so 2n plus 1 indicates the odd positive integers starting with 3, and 2n plus 2 indicates the even positive integers immediately greater than them. 13. Is there another possible basis that makes better sense for the IPA consonant space? Here's what I mean. Currently, we linguistically refer to consonants via their manner of articulation, place of articulation, and voicedness, as well as sometimes additional attributes like aspiration and palatalization. I'm using the word basis in a quasi-linear algebra sense, where I'm saying these are the axes with which we describe consonants. What I'm asking is if it might turn out there are better axes that better capture the crucial aspects of consonant sounds. Or in other words, if out there exists some qualitative extrapolation of a change of basis that would help us understand the consonant space better and work with it easier. Here's what makes me ask that. Consider for instance the v and w sounds, or the voice labiodental fricative and the voice labiovelar approximant respectively. They are very similar sounds, right? In fact, I don't have to just cite my subjective experience of it. I could cite that through history, these sounds transformed into each other many different times across different parts of the world. And yet, voice labiodental fricative and voice labiovelar approximant aren't exactly that similar according to our basis for categorizing consonants. They have neither the same place nor manner of articulation. I'd additionally like to point out that the fact that the voiced labiovelar approximant is among the most common sounds across the world's languages, and yet within our consonant describing system, it needs to be described as this simultaneously articulated combination of two components that are themselves far rarer, the voiced bilabial approximant and the voiced velar approximant. I really feel like there must be some better bases out there than manner of articulation and place of articulation for describing consonants. 14. Okay, so consider the nature of werewolf logic. As it usually goes in folklore, werewolves are humans that become wolves when there is a full moon. Exactly what about the full moon causes the transformation is usually not specified, so for instance, one needs additional details to know about what happens to a werewolf during a lunar eclipse. Also, the precise deviation epsilon the moon can be from 100% full for the werewolf status to hold is usually not specified either, and clearly epsilon is not 0, otherwise a human transforming into a wolf would instantly transform back. Now, here on Earth, we have one moon. Consider a werewolf on a planet with multiple moons. There could be werewolves that respond to one moon but not the other. Heck, you could imagine on a planet with a gigantic number of moons, a werewolf is in wolf form specifically when an odd number of moons are in the full moon state, because the effect of any specific full moon is toggling. You could even imagine the societal dynamics between two cohabitating species of potential werewolves for which they have invented the biological technology to determine the Boolean satisfiability problem in terms of the states of the planet's moons that when evaluated to true causes the conditions upon which a person transforms into a wolf, but for which one species is of 1 in 3 sat werewolves and another species is of XOR 3 sat werewolves, and the 1 in 3 sat werewolves bemoan the condition that the determination of their transformability is NP hard, unlike the other species. Anyway, consider an OR werewolf, a human that turns into a wolf whenever any of a planet's moons is within the margin epsilon of perfect full moonness, living on the dark side of a tidally locked planet. In terms of epsilon, what is the minimum number of moons a planet must have such that an OR werewolf might be permanently in the wolf state, thus possibly living an entire life thinking one's genuinely a wolf and not actually a human? This isn't just a dividing problem because orbiting objects can have elliptical orbits, not just circular, and according to Kepler's second law of planetary motion, objects orbiting on elliptical orbits move faster when they're closer to the object being orbited. 15. Could it possibly be that we as humans are missing a crucial piece of intuition about liquids? Here's why I ask. We all know what a solid is, what a liquid is, and what a gas is, right? There's a whole set of behaviors we expect them to have when other substances interact with them in various ways. But consider this, for nearly all humans, nearly every liquid we regularly interact with is either water, or something dissolved in water, or something suspended in water. What is the chance that there's something about typical liquids that we as humans have failed to intuitively absorb? Consider that water is famously a very unusual substance with numerous properties unlike what one expects of basically all other substances, including other liquids. Could it be that we understand so much about liquids from interacting with water that we miss something that is the case for liquids in general that doesn't express well in water in the same way if nearly all of someone's interaction with an ethnic group is with one member of that ethnic group, but that member is a particularly abnormal member of that group? One could end up with a very inaccurate understanding of the mannerisms, traditions, and values of that ethnic group. Or like how for a long time we came up with explanations for why gas giants should orbit further from a star than terrestrial planets, because that's how they're arranged in our solar system. And then eventually we gained the technology to observe other star systems, and we found out actually most star systems don't organize like this. Our star system is special in having this arrangement. Now, there is a clear distinction between these cases and the liquid situation, namely that scientists are able to plenty experience working with liquids other than water, and presumably, the ones who do and notice something interesting about liquids in general we did not expect will eventually publish notes to the rest of us. But my question is, does the intuition transfer? Because when it comes to solids, liquids, and gases, a lot of what we talk about is high level and based on intuitive understandings of how they are supposed to work, not built off of the scientific definitions of the states of matter. 16. Okay, so you know how in English, one reason that one might write a story in the first person is to make the gender of the narrator a plot twist? Because if you wrote it in the third person, the pronouns you use would reveal the gender as soon as you used one. But in contrast, in Burunge, third-person pronouns are not gendered, while first-person pronouns are gendered. So if you were writing a story in Burunge, you would write it in the third person if you wanted to make the gender of a character a plot twist. You could also conditionally hide plot twists under other aspects that are variant on language, like the different levels of plurality distinction allowing the number of something to be a plot twist in some languages, or using evidentiality to work towards information reliability plot twists, or using politeness levels to work towards inter-character relationship plot twists. So consider this idea. Making a work of fiction such that it gets directly translated among languages, and depending on the language you experience the work of fiction in, the order of and which plot twists of the work of fiction you experience, and hence the narrative you experience, differs. What is the most exciting web of different narratives on the same directly translated work of fiction, dependent on the different distinctions made by different languages, that can be created? Alright, and those are the 16 questions I am asking you. I await to hear your thoughts. And of course, as always, remember to love the night.